This shorts video is brought to you by MitKat Advisory and will give a brief overview on the vaccine distribution in different countries and the COVAX program. We will start by discussing vaccine development and its effect on purchasing parity, and then we'll move on to distribution of vaccines for countries of different income groups. Lastly, I will talk about the COVAX program and its implications. In May of 2020, the United States government struck a deal. $1.2 billion would go to the British drug maker AstraZeneca to speed up their COVID-19 vaccine research. In exchange, AstraZeneca promised the US 300 million doses if the vaccine made it through safety and efficacy trials. These types of transactions where a country makes a direct deal with a company are called bilateral deals, and in 2020, rich countries made a lot of them. Those billions of dollars helped fund research that brought us the world's leading COVID vaccines in record times. But that money also determined where these vaccines would go. Countries representing approximately 16% of the global population held over half the doses from the most promising vaccine developers. In Brazil and India, health systems are already being pushed to the limit, while at the same time, the US is quickly opening up vaccinations for all citizens. This is, in essence, making the pandemic last longer. It's allowing infections to rage and new variants to arise, and at the end of the day, more people are dying than need to be. The problem starts with the vaccine market itself. Getting a vaccine from development to manufacturing to distribution is a multi-step process. By making bilateral deals with developers and suppliers early on, rich countries get in line early on. But there was no guarantee that any given vaccine would work or get past regulators to reach the market. If a vaccine fails shortly after funding, those billion-dollar investments are lost. So to offset that risk, countries invested in multiple options and suppliers, often securing enough doses to cover their populations several times. As of March 2021, Canada had secured over 300 million doses, enough to cover their population 5 times over, and the deals the US made were enough to cover its population at least twice. Most countries can't afford to make multiple high-risk investments early on, and so they wait until the vaccine is further along in the approval process, and by then, they are already at the back of a very long line. Those that made the biggest orders or invested into the research and development are standing at the front of this line, which is why the US has received over 300 million doses so far, at least, and most of the poorer countries in the world don't have 300 million doses combined. Early in the COVID-19 pandemic, many of the world's richest countries poured money into the race for a vaccine. Billions of dollars from programs like the US's Operation Warp Speed funded development that brought us multiple COVID-19 vaccines in record time, but it also determined where those vaccines would go. Before vaccine doses had even hit the market, places like the US and the UK had bought up nearly the entire stock. To combat this issue, COVAX, a program co-led by World Health Organization, Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, and the Coalition of Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, was launched. Its goal is to get vaccines to lower and middle-income countries at the same time as rich countries. So how is it supposed to do that, and will it be enough? The main objective of COVAX is to provide vaccinations to 92 middle and low-income countries that were shut out from making their own deals. So in a sense, COVAX is kind of like the Paris Climate Agreement of the world. It is a multilateral effort with almost 200 countries that have joined, and the idea is that everyone has access to COVID vaccines, regardless of the country's GDP. It does this using a two-part system. The first part allows high-income countries to buy into and access multiple vaccinations at once. So instead of one country giving $2 billion directly to a company like AstraZeneca, they'd give the money to COVAX, which would use it to fund several different vaccines. This way, if one or two of them fail early on, it wouldn't be a total loss. The other vaccines in the portfolio would make up for it. It's a multilateral system that's much lower risk for those countries than a bilateral one. The idea is that COVAX could use the larger purchasing power to negotiate deals with manufacturers and developers on a global scale, which would drive the costs down and fund vaccine development. The second part buys vaccines for low-income countries. It is funded by donations from wealthier governments and charities. The US alone has pledged $4 billion to this fund. As vaccines become available, COVAX hands them out to each and every country at once, so rich countries and poor countries all get a fair share. At least that's the idea. The biggest problem with COVAX is these bilateral deals that we discussed earlier. For COVAX to work as intended, it needs most countries to be using its multilateral system. But the COVAX was formed a month into the pandemic, when many countries had already invested in bilateral deals. So the incentive for rich countries to join COVAX has been low. But without them, COVAX might be underfunded. So we'll let them have them both ways. Rich countries could join COVAX and keep their bilateral deals that would get them more vaccines faster. And those basically undermine COVAX because they would put themselves at the front of the line ahead of the access that countries will get through this collective agreement. The US, for example, has donated the most money to COVAX, but is also still at the front of the manufacturing line, waiting for its own doses. The US and the UK have both promised to donate some surplus doses to COVAX, but neither country has actually said when. This means that in essence, rich countries decide who gets what, when, instead of some global collaborative process of vaccine allocation like COVAX. Experts are still skeptical that COVAX will meet its original goal of delivering 2 billion vaccine doses by the end of 2021. As of May 2021, they have only purchased around half that amount and delivered around 70 million doses. Although they've reached a huge number of countries, it is nowhere near large enough to cover even the frontline health workers or other essential workers in most countries that these vaccines are going to. Meanwhile, the US has already administered close to 300 million doses. So to conclude, vaccine inequality is bigger than just bilateral deals. It's in every step of the process, from limited manufacturing to cold chain distribution. Even debates around the intellectual property of vaccines. Our current system is not a well-oiled machine at all, and there's a lot of work to do if we want to be better prepared for the future. While COVAX is setting out to do a hugely challenging task, and they probably won't meet their own first targets, they are getting vaccines into countries that probably wouldn't have them otherwise, and have them this quickly. So in essence, they're helping combat the pandemic one step at a time. Thank you. I'm Naman from MitKat, and that is it for today.